I'm so excited for you guys to be here today. This is going to be a great panel. So welcome to the afternoon of day 2. You know, as I've been going through the conference and listening, it's been really interesting to hear some of the leading thinkers in our industry. And actually, yesterday I was listening to Ann Johnson from Microsoft say that the new front line is digital. And when she said that, it sounded very timely to the topic that we have today and the people that we have on stage to do the panel. I've heard themes around increasing our capacity, the ability for us to respond to threats and attacks, and the need to be inclusive in our working practices. I've heard a lot about the need to drive innovation and the need to drive new thinking into our teams. And how can we stay strong in the face of adversity? One thing that I really believe and has been front and center in a lot of the conversations, both in the conference and at the bar, has been around the fact that cyber is a team sport. Does everybody agree with that? Fundamentally, absolutely team sport. So when we think about teams and building great teams and having groups of people work together, it starts and ends with culture. And I have to say, I think culture is a new language that we're learning to speak in cyber. Right? It's a new discipline, a new area for us to talk about. And if culture really is the way that we do things, has anyone heard that, been the definition of culture before? It's the implicit and explicit values, our working practices. It's how we get stuff done, right? It can be sustained by a mission, by purpose, by values, by practice, which is what we're going to talk about today, or you can ignore it at your peril. So this panel is going to be a fascinating conversation, no pressure, as we learn from some of the best practices in first response in the physical realm. And I'm Kate Goldman. I'm the CEO and founder of Cybermaniacs. What we are really maniacs about, I guess you could say, is the human side of cybersecurity. So that is what your people know, what they think, what they feel, how they behave, how they learn, how you get groups of people to do great things, how we change. And I think if we're all going to grow and thrive in this new digital era, then we have to find ways to get people on the bus. Does that make sense? Both your employees, the regular folk at your organization, but also your people are your cyber teams. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So we have a model of culture research. We call it digital tribes. And really, what we've found is that there are many different themes and constructs that we can see, factors that are needed, absolutely critical to create success in delivering cyber resilience programs. And that's things like the need for continual training. We all know these things, right? None of this is revolutionary. Being able to use realistic practices in order to train. We also believe that being able to map those underlying values and beliefs and drivers, such as duty, such as trust, are the things that help you bring stories and symbols back into the culture to sustain it. So this is all about how do you build roadmaps? How do you build recipes that you can use to create resilient teams and happy cybersecure humans? So this is really interesting because when we presented this to RSA, they asked us to work with IBM on some amazing research they'd actually done about the first responder community. And it clearly shows that there are some very human challenges we're facing by being on these new front lines. So if incident responders are the new frontline defenders, they're bringing with them a sense of service, right? Does that resonate with everybody here? But they're also struggling with the fact that they're battling on multiple fronts all at one time. And this is having an impact on daily life, stress, mental health. I mean, burnout is a real thing in our industry, right? We're losing a lot of very good people. And I think we also have to pay attention to the fact that we all know bad culture when we see it, right? There is toxic cultures that we need to, that can be repaired, right, that we can put together to make sure that everybody on the team is trusted, well-respected, and working at their best performance. So I think these are the things that it's important to discuss because they're going to stop us from meeting the challenge. And the challenge, which we're going to go into detail today, is that the scope and scale of this problem is unprecedented. We have ransomware now being elevated to a national threat. We have more incidents and attacks happening year over year. So how do we get the best people into our teams, and how do we get them to stay, right? How do we get them to perform at the best without burning out? How do we actually manage all of this? How do we work together? So today we're going to talk about how do we rise to meet that challenge. And I'm very excited to sit and speak with our panel today, because these are all first responders. These are people who are at the front lines in the physical world, some who have crossed over into the digital first responder world. But we're going to have a conversation today about all of these things. So please welcome our panelists. We'll do introductions now. There we go. Cool.
Check 1, 2. All right. All right. Good
Troy, do you want to start?
Sorry.
Oh, well,
So
check
we're
1,
doing
2,
in the
3,
order of
4.
the slides. I'm sorry.
My name is Troy Betancourt. I'm the global head for IBM's X-Force Incident Response Consultancy. I've had, I guess, about 8 years in the private sector. Prior to that, I was a federal agent in the cybercrime arena for Department of Defense and Department of Treasury.
Thank you.
Eric Pound. I'm in real life, I'm a lieutenant in the New York City Fire Department. Also have spent some time in the military as a flight engineer and aerial gunner on combat search and rescue helicopters. And most recently in the past year, and I only mention this to try to get some credibility from the crowd, I've been working with a DoD research organization doing AI/ML application engineering.
Good afternoon, everyone. Retired Lieutenant Gus Rodriguez with the NYPD. After 23 years and 7 months, I went like that and said, God bless the NYPD. Intel and counterterrorism detailed to the FBI New York Cyber Task Force in the cyber realm for the last 10 years. So thanks for having us.
Fantastic. So one of the things we talked about in the open, and we had talked about on the phone preparing for this panel, was what drew you to be a first responder? What drew you to the industry? Why do you do what you do? Gus, do you want to kick us off with that?
Oh, absolutely. I always knew Mom and Dad raised us in the South Bronx, and I always knew, rest in peace to both of them, I always knew that public service was what we wanted to do. Mom and Dad wanted 3 cardiologists. She got 3 cops. They got 3 cops. And it was literally the best decision I think I ever made, just to give back to 8.5 million New Yorkers and really what happened in the last 24 years that I'm so excited to talk about.
Fantastic. And so what do you think some of those underpinning values were? Because we talked about service. And I think the New York City Police Department in particular has that as a core value. It's actually on the label of the cars.
It is. It is. Courtesy, professional, and respect. But I think the service attribute, if I could get into 3 years after I came on the job,
right,
and if we could get into that conversation, which we had, I came on in September 1998, 27 years old, and 3 years later, 9/11 happened. And the things that I saw, experienced, heard, inhaled, make me feel that that was the day that I knew why I joined the New York City Police Department. And 22 Septembers later, I get to have a gift. I get to be sitting here to talk about that. So I think that was my guiding light. That was our guiding light throughout, my entire career. But that day really did show me why I joined and got on the job.
Absolutely. Eric, what about you?
Yeah, I had to give this some thought. I think initially I was drawn to my jobs out of excitement. I was an 18-year-old kid. I wanted to do fun stuff. But I think what's more important, and probably what we're talking about, is like the reason that I continue to do it, and the reason that New York City firemen specifically, and NYPD and military members will literally give their lives for one another, is because you build a family together. Like, you don't do that sort of stuff for a paycheck, and I think it's important that you have that culture where people want to do those things for one another, and by extension, the public and sort of serving their role in community as well.
Absolutely. Troy, what about you?
It wasn't as much the fun, although there was some of that. Mine was a transition from college into the military. There was the sense of service growing up, definitely had like a superhero complex. If we played cops and robbers, you clearly define good guys, bad guys. I was always on the good guys, never wanted to be the bad guy. wanted to right wrongs. Like, I don't know, maybe I just read comic books too much or something, but that's really what started it, and it continues it. It's the opportunity to help people. Now it's in the private sector, so you're helping, or at least in my role, large corporations or companies, but that can sound mercenistic, but those companies provide goods, services, right? People's jobs, et cetera. Some of them are critical infrastructure. So yeah, I think that it's continued. I just don't think I'm a superhero anymore.
Right. Yeah. And I think one of the things that we had talked about, which is interesting, is the research that IBM did around first responders and what the culture and what the behaviors are like. And that duty and that sense of service actually came up with, I think, 67% of the respondents.
77%.
Oh
Actually, the sense of service was in the top three for 77% of the responders or respondents to the survey who were all incident responders.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm going to actually pose a question to the audience for a second. Watch out. Panel on fire. It's coming to you guys now. How many of you think you joined the cyber community for that sense of service? Just quick show of hands. Yeah. Quite a bit. So it is about being part of that community and the safety and the security and giving back to others. Definitely. So it's interesting because what we talked about is being part of a team, that sense of service, that sense of purpose and mission. Gus, that was really important for you in terms of how your career grew from stage to stage, going from each part of this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I think the really cool part, the interesting part is that we kept repeating this, and I heard it in the opening statements yesterday. We talked about public safety and national security, and it's amazing that recently I posted something to LinkedIn that I've never shared, and it's a helmet. And when I responded to Ground Zero, a utility worker gave me a yellow helmet to obviously protect ourselves from the falling debris. And everywhere since 9/11, after digging for 8 months, then being lucky and going home, after every single desk I've occupied at the NYPD for the last 23 years, that helmet has been on that desk. It was there on the desk. It was there when I went to Singapore with the NYPD, because after 9/11, we wanted to have 13 people overseas to know what was going on overseas, to mitigate a 9/11. I covered Tokyo to Australia, Sri Lanka to Manila. It sat in Singapore. It sat when I came back home at the FBI National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force in DC. It sat at my FBI desk in New York. It was always there because that helmet kept reminding me what's at stake. And now it sits in my home, obviously. So again, it's just a symbol and the guiding light to the last 10 years in cyber for New York City.
And those are the stories that are so important. So we talk about symbols. That is one of the structures of culture, is how do you take that and share that with your team? How do you have those same symbols so that everybody knows what the sense of mission is and how do we do it? Because I do think it's amazing. We think about 9/11, we think about the fire, the police response, how that actually happens, some of the stories that you gentlemen have shared with me about how we do what we do. You know, how do you become prepared to run into a burning building or put your life on the line? And so we've talked a lot about practice. What does drilling, training, how much does this come into play in helping our teams be prepared to meet the challenges in front of them? And I don't know, Eric, if you've got anything to say about that, because you had some good experiences there.
Yeah, I mean, like, training in the fire department is quite literally a daily occurrence. So it starts obviously with the individual and like sort of doing their knowledge reviews, reading, but every day we do some sort of small drill in the firehouse, and it's generally kind of an individual, like, fundamental skill, very very specific. Go over it a few times, and it's sort of it's like the how we do something, and then every week or so we'll do like a multi-unit drill, and we sort of drill like our company, so our small group, 5 or 6 people. Kind of drilling with their people, and that's kind of what we do. And then less frequently, but probably more important, is we have multiple companies come together and do some sort of large-scale exercise, is what the military would refer to it as. And that's sort of the why we do something, right? That's like, hey, we are responding to some sort of emergency, and we're going to put all the pieces together. But none of these happen without the lower levels. So it's just so important that you do that every day, because at the end of the day, I'm sure much like in the fire department, you don't get to choose when it happens. Like when the alarm goes off, your time to train is over, and you have to take with you whatever you have. There's a saying in the military that the enemy gets a vote, and it's absolutely true. So like you can't necessarily control when or where, or sometimes what you're going to be asked to do. So I think it's just so important that you make it an everyday occurrence.
And I think the drilling and training is important. I have a military, law enforcement, and now cyber background. And in the military and law enforcement, you train all of these standard tasks because when something does happen, when the enemy gets the vote, you don't want to expend mental energy figuring out the basics, right? You really need to be on top of it. You can't think, where is my trauma kit? Where's my gun? Where's extra ammunition? You just need to know those things. Same thing in cyber. You've got to train those standard tasks over and over because the last thing you need to do in a time-sensitive situation is try to figure out the basics, right? They should be second nature.
And I think it's partly the coordination of that we had talked about before, because if we're talking about teams, there's the muscle memory of each person responding in their own unit. But then, Gus, we talked about partnership, and Troy, we talked about coordinating a cyber team.
Right.
How much does the speed matter when the chips are down?
I would argue in all disciplines, speed's very important. Exactly. I would argue more so in theirs than ours. But yeah, absolutely, the speed does matter. And then, just as Eric mentioned, starting at the individual skills and then moving into more combined, larger group exercises. For us in the cyber world, I manage a global consultancy, so we're often handing work off to different regions to do a follow-the-sun model. And if we don't train everybody across the globe in at least very similar mechanisms, expectations, outputs, processes, et cetera, it quickly crumbles and falls apart.
I wanted to say, in my counterterrorism days, we all heard the good folks have all the fancy watches, but the enemy has all the time. And when you're talking about training, I like to make the connection between why I keep reverting back to 9/11 and front forward 12 years later when you're talking about teams. When we're talking about how did New York City evolve as far as our cyber command, we first responders knew what we saw 22 years ago, and we knew the parallel line was cyber in the city of New York. And we knew because of that, we didn't go to MIT and we didn't have any computer science degrees. This is a good part. This is the cool part. But we knew the threat. So one day, we, the NYPD, January 23rd, 2015, email the LAPD and say, you have a cyber command and we don't. Can you give us all that information? And that collaboration starts. From January 23rd, 2015 until July 2017, we configured that to our city of 120 agencies. And in July of 2017, the mayor signed the executive order for New York City Cyber Command. Again, that was spawned from a first responder agency. And that's how we now have Cyber Command. And now the entire state has a Cyber Command. So it's amazing. Again, I wanted to make that connection. Why does he keep talking about 9/11? That's why. No, that's the difference in the city of New York. And that's where you have that. When I was first here in 2020, the saying here at RSA was the human element on the bags. That's the human element. And obviously, I love this year, Stronger Together. Mm-hmm. But again, that's a little story about Cyber Command and how that, and I'll get into what's at stake and what we were protecting, but please, I'm sorry for that long sentence.
It was a very good sentence. Well done.
Good.
So one of the things that we had talked about that I think is very important to this topic in the audience is around burnout and voluntary attrition. Because again, if we're talking about team cohesiveness, if we're talking about building a strong team, we talk about trust. And trust is built over time. It's just not given overnight, especially when you're putting your life on your line, right? And you're trying to work in different and dangerous conditions. So Gartner recently predicted that nearly 50% of cyber leaders will change jobs by 2025. And 25% of cybersecurity leaders will pursue different roles entirely due to workplace stress. And so I wanted to ask you, how do we fulfill this critical mission and not burn out? And Troy, I was hoping that you could start because you've seen both sides of this equation.
Yeah, so thanks, Kate. Prior to moving back into management, I was in management and then I left for some family health reasons for over a decade was just loving being an individual contributor, right? You get to do all the cool, fun, sexy stuff. You don't have to deal with the human element, right? So it was a lot of fun at the time. But ransomware started happening, right? And after multiple years of that, and I was the senior practitioner at the time globally, so all the big cases came to me, or the high-touch clients, all the challenges. And it was about a 4-month span. I think I worked like 2 roughly 40-hour weeks. The rest were 60, 70, whatever. Lots of weekends, family disruption. And then one day, my wife, who's been like really my career rudder, she's made some very good insights over the years that sort of got me to where I was, pulled me aside and in much nicer, kinder terms basically said, you're being a crap father, you're being a crap husband, and you're a jerk to just about everybody you deal with. And that's not me. Like, I want to be friends with everyone. I want to have a good time. I just want to be out there. And I was like, oh, you noticed? Like, I thought I've had this covered. She's like, no, it's been going on for months. And I truly thought, like, nobody saw it. I thought I had it covered, and I clearly didn't. So I went to my boss at the time, who's somewhere around here, I don't know where he is, and basically said, I got to find another job. Either with this company, somewhere else, something. I can't do this anymore. And got back into management. So now it's very important to me to make sure we're keeping tabs on that. In the last year, I've had one consultant end up in an inpatient facility due to burnout. I had another leave. She still has college loans for her cyber degree. She's going back to school to be a librarian. And I thought, man, that seems like a dream job right now, right? It's quiet. You just go in. So yeah, it's real. It really is. It can be very tough.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about from the first responder community? I mean, how do you deal with stress and burnout?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I mentioned, that the Firehouse is like a large family. Actually, it's like a bunch of brothers that beat each other up in the basement. But I think it's important, and again, you don't do these sorts of things for a paycheck. I think if it were that simple, it'd be a lot easier. But I think it just requires, a community of folks to meet outside of work, to have sort of like cross communications outside of work that don't necessarily pertain to the workplace. And that's also a great way to find out sort of some niche skills that people may have that come in handy at strange times. But that's sort of how you build, I think, those sorts of relationships that you can talk to someone who understands what you're going through and, have them help carry the load sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we call it signing out at the end of every tour. And when you're standing at the bottom of the Millennium Hotel 22 years ago, and the FDNY has a laser on the hotel to detect movement because there was fear that it was going to collapse as we were digging. And when that alarm goes off and your partner pulls you from the back of the neck and we start running up the West Side Highway because we think that building is going to fall on us, you look at your partner and you say, and this is what we sign up for, right? When you sign up for law enforcement, when you sign up for FDNY, there's a possibility you're not going to go home. So when the word he just said right now, family, when you develop that relationship, that family type relationship, that the person next to you in that sector car, or the person digging with you at the Millennium Hotel, or the person when you're responding to shots fired, that he or she is going to make sure that you sign out when you go home. You start looking at that person differently. You're like, he or she got my back. And that's why we do the job. And that's where I see where first responders could really just share that with, I'm talking to the best of the best right now, I know that, digital first responders. So when you start bringing those two worlds together, then you start mitigating that stress where those digital first responders are gonna, I hope that Gartner report is wrong. I hope 50% of CISOs don't quit and become librarians. But when you have that, that makes it better.
Yeah, I think they're going to go to the beach.
I think one of the challenges that we face in the cyber world is we're not sitting in a patrol car together, right? We're not digging at ground zero. We're probably remote. I've been in my current role almost a year now. I've this morning just met 6 people that work for me that I've never met in person before. So it's different, and I've been in places that have tried to force culture on people, right? You're gonna be friends, you're gonna do this. It doesn't work. Everybody knows it's transparent. For my field at least, what I think is building small teams, not more than maybe 4 or 5 people, because studies have shown whether it's warfighters, police, fire, whatever, people go above and beyond because they don't want to let down their peers, the people they've built those strong relationships with, and building the small teams and allowing people to dip out when they need to. Maybe they need a break, they're burning out, sick kids, sick spouse, whatever, and not feel like they left people in the lurch because they know that person would do it for them. That really alleviates the burnout. Having a whole bunch of great individual contributors is awesome, but they're all single points of failure if you don't build that team culture around it.
Yeah, and I think it's important too, like, we talked about sort of doing stuff outside the workplace, and it's not necessarily just about going to coworkers and saying like, hey, let's go have a beer after work. It's about the organization taking an active role in creating space for these things to happen. Also, and I think Gus would agree, the city has a great, what we call a counseling service unit, where if you have any sort of problem and you cannot go to work, your kid is sick, relationship problems, whatever it may be, there's the ability to sort of go offline and see the counseling service unit for some period of time that allows people to sort of get their mind right and get back to work 100%. And I think that's super important. It shouldn't be underestimated whatsoever.
That's a great point.
It was interesting talking to a bunch of CISOs before this and kind of asking them what their working practices were and how they dealt with it. The concept of peer support and trust was absolutely front and center. And one of the things I found fascinating was one of the CISOs said that basically during his daily stand-up, he actually had to almost force people to have those conversations, to do the check-in on how are you doing, and not like how are you doing, but like how are you doing? And that was actually part of the daily practice. And Troy, I was wondering, what do you think about that in terms of like peer support, or do you think cyber people are somewhat reticent to share the burnout information sometimes?
I think it's becoming more culturally acceptable. When I was in law enforcement in the military, it wasn't. It's great to see that it is now, right? The only time you saw a counselor was after an officer-involved shooting. Otherwise, you were weak. The culture's definitely shifted there. I think cyber's different in that in police and fire, there's a recognition of trauma, usually as singular events, and they're finally coming around to the idea that trauma builds over time, right? You can have chronic trauma. In cyber, we don't have that singular trauma, right, for the most part. But over time, these things can build up. And I think maybe we're just behind the times in recognizing that. But most companies have really great EAP programs or support programs. But it's important to us as the leaders to make sure that's not a black mark for taking advantage of it, right? It should never be viewed as a black mark. That's a resource that's out there because that's how you're going to retain your people. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I guess one follow-up question to that would be, what do you think the conditions are, or how do we actually, what are the conditions that create that level of burnout and stress that you've seen before? Is it, we talked about the size of teams not being too big to make sure we can create those personal connections, but anything else that you've seen that you think is like, yeah, that's definitely a problem?
I'll throw a question at the audience. Mm-hmm. How many of you have seen or have actually promoted somebody to a role because they're really the best technical person you got, and you promote them into management because it's the next logical step? There should be more hands out there because I've worked in plenty of places or seen them, right? We sometimes think like that person's the greatest hacker, the greatest defender, the greatest whatever it is. The next logical thing now, they've been doing this role forever, is to make them a manager. Those are not analogous skill sets, right? We need to pick people that are good managers. We need to empower people to be good managers and set that as a cultural expectation. In a consultancy like I'm involved in, if you're not billing clients, you're not making the company money, right? You're dead weight. And you've got to change that perspective, that non-billable time that people are learning about each other's families, their kids, their interests, whatever, that is what builds your team. It's not just working on tough engagements. It's not just letting them go to RSA and party and have a great time. It's really getting to understand each other and not view that as a cost, but as it is a cost, but it's an investment into the teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had talked a little bit about either staffing levels or also around, because we are resource strapped in a way, and we are in, I know a lot of companies are reducing their cyber spend this year. That's going to hit the labor pool at some point. So we've already been asking our teams to do so much. How can we ask them to do more?
That's a good question. I would even rephrase it. Should we ask them to do more? Right? There's always going to be a business case for the people you have and the skill sets, et cetera. But if you just keep asking people to do more, we all know you might get more out of them, but the quality is probably going to decrease across the board, right? You're squeezing the same amount of juice out of that lemon or whatever. You're just spreading it more. So we have to resource them better. Maybe we look at processes and efficiencies, right? Technology is awesome. I work for IBM, right? Technology, woohoo! It's people in process. You can buy the best technology in the world, but if you don't enable your people with good processes and good teammates and good culture, your response is probably not going to be great. If you have mediocre tools but great people and processes, you can win. So invest heavily in your people and your processes, fine-tuning it. When times are good, do the investment. So when times are bad, you realize the return on that investment. And if anyone in IBM's in the room, I fully support technology. You'd get fired.
But Eric, I mean, in terms of like the staffing at the firehouse, because you're a lieutenant, so you've got to think about like how you rotate people, how the shifts, how you make sure they're not burned out. I mean, what kind of considerations are you asked to take in terms of keeping the teams functioning at a high level?
Yeah, but I think it's somewhat built into how we manage it culturally. So again, when people need time off or to go see the counseling service unit or they're taking vacation, then we just feel that as necessary.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's quite analogous to the tech world, unfortunately, but I think we understand the importance of people having that downtime, and it's so critically important that people show up ready to work when they're there.
And I think just to add to that, show up ready to work. I think something that I've always been lucky to have as a young cop, young sergeant in the NYPD, great leaders who always shared with me what's at stake, right? Why are we coming to work? Why are we doing this? And something that I always repeat at presentations like this, something that I always told my detectives who were detailed to the FBI New York Cyber Task Force is, we're protecting 25,000 911 calls a day. We're protecting 13,000 traffic lights, 53,000 member NYPD, 320,000 people work for the NYPD, 62 acute care hospitals, 35 train lines. You throw that at them and you make them understand why they're coming to work. And this morning, of course, I had to see how many gallons of water San Francisco uses a day, 38 million gallons, and we use 1.1. But again, the reason I throw those numbers out there is because that's why we're waking up in the morning and coming to work. And that leadership and motivating those folks to come to work, including folks like you that help us in New York City protect that infrastructure, it makes all the difference in the world, because then people know why they're coming to work. But I've also had some bosses at the NYPD that just come to work and just sit at their desk and don't motivate and don't protect. So again, we have to share with the teams what's at stake, especially like a person like David Cass, who's hiding right there, former CISO of IBM. When you're talking about a leader at IBM, and I'm sorry, I got to blow you up, David. When we create a public-private partnership in the city of New York, Cyber Critical Services and Infrastructure Working Group, and we bring the private and public sector together, and he starts talking about an IBM range in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we have a New York City team, and I say, David, can we go? And he goes, the city never went. And then he calls back and says, come on down. December the 5th, 2018, July 26, 2019, and December 6, 2019, the entire New York City team goes up to Cambridge because David really does mean, IBM really does mean public-private collaboration. So sorry to blow you up, but hats off to true partnerships.
Go.
And I need to give Gus something for promoting the cyber range, which is my team. So thanks, Gus. Anybody wants to come to Cambridge, let me know.
Oh my God. I love that place.
Well, I think that, because what you were talking on is very important, because we had talked about strong leadership and the importance of driving a team culture by setting the mission, right? So if we have the sense of service, we have the sense of duty, what is the mission now? What is the mission that we're setting before our teams?
I think the mission now, as I wrote yesterday, the mission now is elevating the conversation to the place that I feel it always should have been. It always should have been at the public safety, national security. It should have been in that topic. Ann Neuberger, 9 weeks ago, from the White House, we all read, said, Ransomware is, we're no longer looking at ransomware as a criminal threat. We're looking at it as a national security threat. When you got language like that coming out of the White House, I think we're all talking, we're all on the same page now, and I was so happy to finally see that. But when first responders are working closely with digital first responders the way we should be, and really tackling this the way it should be tackled, until that happens, I'm just going to keep speaking because it has to get to that point.
Fair enough. Troy, what do you think in the real world are the obstacles to our mission?
Oh, so in the real world, meaning my digital real world, the metaverse, I guess, is it? I think in many people, I see some of you look like you're probably around my generation. You get the gray, maybe you're balding. We've been saying the same message for the last 20 plus years about security, right? Clearly, we're not messaging right to the decision makers when they're still viewing security as a cost center, it's a business inhibitor. We need to change the narrative. And I've been to conferences and I've said this, and man, do I get people angry. They come after and want to argue with me. But if we've been doing the same thing for 20 years with the same results, right, we're probably doing something a little wrong. I think we need to change that messaging to get those that are in that decision-making, whether it's at the C-suite, a risk committee on a board, or in government at the decision-making level, got to understand that this is all about managing your risk, right? That's the language that they're speaking. Don't talk geek. Don't even talk the dollars, right, except as a relation to risk. It's all about risk. And elevation to like national security, cybersecurity strategy or national security strategy is huge. We need to do the same thing within corporate culture. We deal with Fortune 100 companies all the time, and they still view security as a cost center, not an integral part of the business. This is obviously going to be a little bit of selection bias. Does anybody not work for a technology company in here? Okay. So if we took away all your technology, the company would totally work. Got rid of your Active Directory, single sign-on, email. Do you still have a company? Right? If you make widgets, you make cabinets. If you can't order raw materials, get them in, can't build them, can't ship them, can't build for them, can't pay your people, you don't have a company anymore. We need to really be thinking of technology as part of the business and not just a cost. It is your business identity. Those that want to invest, when I retire, I am going to sell flip-flops at the beach. No technology. I've got a great business proposal for you. Get with me.
But it is an interesting thing to say, where are we now that ransomware has been elevated to a state-sponsored, national security threat? We know we have to create these teams. Gus, you were talking very much about how do we actually tell that story? How do we get out there and make this something that I think putting the responsibility entirely on cyber teams is, and I love it because I'm like, yes, we should all be out there having this conversation and proselytizing and getting it out there, but it has to be a wider conversation. It has to be something that we're talking about at the society level. And I know, Gus, you're doing a ton of stuff in that area to try to get the message out about what we're actually facing and how important this is to everyone, to everybody's digital future.
Absolutely. I think, again, I'm always going to revert back to the New York City model, and whether it's not just law enforcement, it's not just the city of New York, it's academia, it's the public, it's see something, say something. When it's again, I go back to true partnerships, and I talked about David, but let's talk about why is the NYPD teaming up with the FBI, and what type of partnership is that? And I always love when actual partnerships are tested, because we all say partnerships and we all say they're great, and then 7 May 2021 happens and a place called Colonial goes down. And of course the next day it's my daughter's birthday, 8 May, and I need to find out what happened at Colonial, and the phone is going to start ringing in 5 minutes from my boss, my former boss, Deputy Commissioner John Miller. When I call my counterpart at FBI, the first thing, I don't even ask the question. And he says, dark side, at 11:16 in the morning. And at that moment, you take those IOCs and you hit send yesterday to 120 agencies in the city of New York and the private sector. And then I go to my daughter's party, and then at 3 p.m. that afternoon, the New York Times says dark side. So that's when the NYPD says, wow, that partnership is real, it's valuable, let's keep enforcing that. So I'm a big believer in not just saying partnership is good. But when those May 7th, 2021s happen and we need to know what's going on so we could protect all those numbers that we need to know it's dark side, and we did. So that makes coming to work fun because you know it works.
Well, absolutely. And I think that's to the sense of the mission too, because what you just said was, what are we protecting? And I think maybe that's the story that needs to evolve, right? Within the cybersecurity community, is we talk a lot about the crown jewels. We talk about a lot protecting the company's data. But at the end of the day, you know, what you said and what the fire department's mission is to protect people, to protect livelihoods, to protect human, you know, our human communities. And so how are we as cyber going to get out there and tell those stories so that everyone feels connected to the story now? Because it's very easy to say it's just a box with blinking lights and wires and stuff. How do you make that connection?
I just want to make the connection here. So everyone in this room, what village, county, state, city, province do you come from? And again, I'll keep saying I'm looking at the best of the best. Is there a way, if you aren't doing it already, how many gallons of water go into your city, into your state every day? How many traffic lights? How many hospitals? And is there a way, I'll keep qualifying this, if you're not doing it already, to help those public defenders where you live, where your family lives, where your hospitals are? I think when you talk about force multiplier and you start tapping into the acumen in front of me right now to actually protect where you live and where your family lives, then it makes it real. And then and again, I call that's the asymmetric solution in cybersecurity. I think that's the next iteration, humbly speaking, of cybersecurity, when we actually start plugging in the entire community to protecting life and property.
I think it's changing the messaging. Like your background, psychology, and the human aspect of it. You know, a lot of us, and I'm guilty of this, it's sometimes hard to relate to notional things unless you've experienced them, right? Somebody can have a trauma in their life, and you can say, oh, well, it's terrible, it's horrible, but you truly can't understand it for most people, right? For many people. There's some that are very empathetic. Same thing with the cyber stuff. People just don't get it. You know, we're in our bubble, right? We get it because we deal with it daily, but most people don't. So we have to change that messaging to make it where they see what the impact would be. You know, if you just took everybody's phones away, think of what you do with your life on your phone nowadays. How disruptive would that be? Take the technology from your house. You know, I live in Florida, so we get hurricanes. We got hammered last year. And it's amazing. Go 7-10 days without power and internet, and I swear society starts to devolve now. It's absolutely crazy. And if you take our AC, forget it, we're done. So just think of that. And you know, like Gus mentioned, people don't think about it. When sanitation stops working and trash starts piling up and disease and you don't have water, you can't flush your toilets, like that makes it real. We live, most of us in the audience probably live in a Western nation that's pretty advanced, has a lot of supporting systems, and technology enables all of them. Even the most basic things right now in our society are technology enabled.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because I think when we talk about the sense of mission, right, and there does need to be a change in the narrative in order to bring people into that. So it's what are we protecting? Why are we protecting it? It's two sides of the same coin, because when we start talking about protecting people and protecting our communities, and we start coming away from some of the things that are harder for people to understand, if we start telling our stories, right, using symbols like the hard hat, right, being able to tell about personal experiences and why it happened, it's the two sides of the same coin, that leadership can come in and define the mission that makes sense to the business, makes sense to the C-suite, and actually drives the team. Because at the end of the day, the sense of excitement is absolutely there, never knowing what's going to happen, you know, when the chips are down, relying on your team, working in really tight groups, all that stuff is great, but you have to know where you're going and what is it all for.
You know, when I was in the military, I was in the Army, Eric's in the Air Force, we called it leader's intent, right? And one of the reasons Western militaries tend to do better than former Eastern Bloc was they devolve leadership down, right? So at the top leader level, you identify a goal, an objective, maybe a time frame to accomplish it, but you let people know the why, so that as communication falls out, maybe key leaders get injured, wounded, or killed maybe, people below know what the intent was. And if something changes, that the enemy has the voice, right? They have the time, people lower down can pivot and can know what they need to do. And I think identifying a mission, communicating the mission, but really communicating the why. Why do we do it? So in your absence, your subordinate leaders and your individual contributors know what they need to do. They can make their own decisions. They can be flexible, but in the end, it's all to achieve the same objective.
I think that also works in day-to-day, right? If people sort of run out of something to do by 3 in the afternoon, and occasionally they're looking for something to do, like the mission and vision statement or commander's intent is very much the direction that they should be expending resources for the company to achieve those. So I think it extends beyond just some sort of wartime or emergency event. Like it's a day-to-day reality.
I would agree.
Yeah, I think again, I always go back to you have to motivate your people. That was my only job at the NYPD: motivate and protect my people. That's it. And they always wanted to come to work, because when you say in 2017, let's go up to the agency that protects New York City water, and you go up to an undisclosed location in Westchester County, and you actually hear the 1.1 billion gallons of water coming into the city of New York, and we're there collaborating with the entire U.S. intelligence community and the NYPD and the FDNY and all 120. They know that what we're doing that day, which we're still doing today, they know that that never happened. And they feel that they're part of history. So again, that's what makes coming to work fun. Or when Suffolk County gets hit with a cyber attack on September the 8th of last year. And again, this is the problem, where 4 months ago, before that, the FBI sends out pins on that same type of malware, but Suffolk never got that. New York. So it's those type of things, like you're sitting in the middle of something. You see the gap. It's right in your face, and you just make sure that the 5 boroughs of the city of New York, hey, and they don't get hit. So what I always say is, I can't sit here and tell anybody how many things we've prevented since November of 2013 in the city of New York. I don't know. But that's cool. I'm okay with that, because I know we've prevented a lot. So again, coming to work, making it fun, motivating your people, that's what makes the difference at the end of the day.
Yeah, and we're all on the same team.
That's right.
So that's interesting. I think in order to wrap up, I'd really like to leave with some practical tips and advice or recommendations that you would make so that the people in this room can take action and go forth into that good night. So any practical tips, or what would you suggest in terms of what would you suggest in terms of things that people could do tomorrow to implement either in their teams or implement in terms of practicing, drilling, communicating better, all the topics that we talked about today?
I would say start at the top, meaning the vision and the strategy. When I was younger, vision, statement, strategy, I just thought that's what leaders did, managers, because they didn't really have a job, right? It didn't mean much in my mind. Now I get the value of it, right? You've got to understand who you want to be so you can be what you want to be. And if you don't have an idea of what you want to be, then everything else is just moving stuff around. You'll have some successes, you'll have some failures, but you don't really optimize your success. So identify who that is, what's your identity, communicate that to your people. They then know the intent. Everything else will just cascade down. And then you can start focusing on building teams, selecting good leaders, right? Building those teams, building a sense of team, a sense of identity. One, because you get the peer support, but also you build in a little inherent competitiveness between your teams, which then causes people often to perform even better. So I would say start at the top, get that nailed down, and then start working downward.
And the vision and the values are so important, because then people know the way it should be done.
Right.
Because in a vacuum, people are going to revert back to their habits or the ways that they've worked before, either in a good culture or possibly in a bad one. And if we have that standard and it's defined and it's on the wall, or we find ways to communicate it with each other through stories and other things, then people know what's the right behavior. This is the way we do things here. I've got your back. This is how we respond. This is the right way. But in the absence of it, people are going to come up with their own devices. So exactly right. It's very important.
One more thing that I forgot.
There you go.
Back your people, right? Like, you cannot have a culture where a fear of failure is a career-ending event, right? My general rule is, as long as it was done with good intentions and was just not so grossly negligent I can't avoid it, I'll have your back through anything. And you can have some pretty significant impacts through employee poor decisions, right? Especially when you're dealing with large enterprise customers. And if they are operating under the feeling that it could be their job, you're never going to have a good team. You really have to back your people.
Well, Troy did a really nice job of stealing exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, again, I will say that the mission and vision statement drive everything, because again, that's where your teams are going to derive their direction from. I think training is the next best thing. There's a quote that I love that's, you don't rise to the occasion, you revert to the level of your training. So if you're not training, expect that that's exactly how you're going to operate when the time comes. And yeah, so I'm also going to assume that there's a lot of policy deciders here. Again, this sort of dovetails what Troy said, but make space for your people to do what they need to do to be 100% ready to work. You know, there's nothing worse than thinking you have something covered, and it turns out that person is unable to do so because they're either mentally or physically unequipped to handle it.
I'll end with interdependencies. I'll end with what I already said. If there's a way that the folks in this room could leave here and help their public sector wherever you live, and I'll keep using the Cass rule, the David Cass rule. If there's something in your organization that can help first responders in your area of responsibility, please try to connect. If there is already a team effort underway, fantastic. But if there isn't, if you could go back home and actually help those first responders, because you're digital first responders, I think that's what I want to leave off. But thank you. Thank you for having us.
Well, I have to say, it has been a great conversation. Thank you all for your time, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.